Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing some concepts from Chapter 6 of Maxfield and Babbie. Chapter 6 is all about different ways of measuring crime. And the chapter does go pretty detailed and in depth into these various strategies, but there's one key thing to remember. All of these data collection strategies fall under four primary categories. So there's crimes known to the police, victimization surveys, offending surveys, and drug surveillance systems. And so, if you keep those four categories in mind, it's really kind of easy to then understand how each of the data collection mechanisms and crime measurement mechanisms just they fall within those four broad families. So the first one is crimes known to the police. As the name implies, these are crimes that have been detected and reported on by the police. Probably the most famous example is the Uniform Crime Reports, or the UCR, that's maintained by the FBI. And this is an annual report that they issue that contains aggregated city, county, and state level data on violent and property crimes. So if, let's say, someone burglarized my house, I would call the police. The police would come out and take a report. Ultimately, that report would end up in the UCR at the city level here, City of Orlando. Um, and it would also make it into the state level. So one thing to keep in mind is that the UCR uses aggregated data. So we don't get information about individual offenses. It's basically just a count of the number of property crimes in a city, number of property crimes in a county, and the number of property crimes in the state. So it's aggregated data. The FBI also maintains the Supplementary Homicide Report. This is a little bit different. First, it focuses strictly on homicides, no other crimes. And second, this is individual level. So rather than being aggregated data, you can actually pull individual level data on specific incidents and get a lot of information about the victim and the offender and race and age and how the murder was committed and so on. So this is very detailed. And the final reporting mechanism is the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. This was started by the FBI a number of years ago, just in an effort to provide more detailed information that was missing from the UCR. This is, as the name implies, it's incident-based, so more information is collected about individual incidents. There's a lot more detail collected. There's more crime categories under NIBRS than there are in the UCR. So it's possible to go a little bit deeper and get some more information on individual incidents with NIBRS. So the second category of reporting systems are victim surveys. So one of the key problems with relying on police data to identify crime is that the police obviously do not detect or even lodge reports against all crime. Police data is really bad about catching crimes, victimless crimes like drug use and prostitution, or certain offenses like domestic violence or certain sex crimes that maybe aren't going to be reported to the police. And so, one attempt to try and get a better handle on some of those crimes is through victimization surveys. Like the National Crime Victimization Survey, or NCVS, is probably the most famous. And this is conducted by the Census Bureau. And basically, it is a random sample of households. And if you're selected to be in the study, you'll be in the study for approximately 3 years, and every 6 months, an interviewer will come out to your house and they'll ask you to describe any times in the last 6 months that you've been a victim of a crime. And they have just a list of crimes, and you can say if you've been victimized within the last 6 months. So again, the whole point of the NCVS and similar victimization surveys is just to get a sense of crimes that maybe aren't being caught by some of the other reporting mechanisms. The third category is surveys of offending. Basically, these are self-report surveys where we interview people and ask them to be honest and tell us about crimes that they have committed themselves. This is really good for getting information about the so-called victimless crimes like drug use, prostitution, gambling, and also some juvenile-related offenses, so like truancy, underage use of alcohol, and underage tobacco use. So there's two primary reporting systems. There's the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, or NUSDA. This is a census of households, and this targets younger people as well as adults, and basically just ask them questions about in their life how many times they've used drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. There's also Monitoring the Future. This is a survey that targets specifically seniors in high school and also eighth graders. So random samples of high school seniors and eighth graders, and ask them questions primarily about drug and tobacco and alcohol use. And there's some offending questions in there as well. And then the final category of reporting systems are drug surveillance systems. Probably the best known is DAWN, or the Drug Abuse Warning Network. And basically, this collects information from hospital emergency rooms and medical examiners' offices about drug overdoses and drug-related deaths. So that's one of our key drug surveillance systems, DAWN. So basically, to summarize, 4 categories: crimes known to police, okay, which consist of the uniform crime reports, the supplementary homicide reports, and also the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. Then we have our victim surveys. The primary one is the National Crime Victimization Survey, or NCVS, to kind of capture some of those crimes that aren't reported to the police. We also have our self-report surveys of offenders, and the primary ones there are the National Survey on Drug Use and Health and Monitoring the Future. And then finally, our drug surveillance systems, and the primary one there is DAWN, or the Drug Abuse Warning Network. A lot of times students will ask, what is the perfect measure of crime? And the answer is, there really is no perfect measure. The measure that you choose depends on the nature of your study, what your research questions are, and what your study objectives are. And then ultimately that'll dictate what measurement you'll use. So, for instance, if you're interested in just knowing city-level crime trends like property crime in Orlando or violent crime in New York, probably the UCR would be your best bet. You probably won't want to use the UCR to measure something like drug use, for instance. If you're interested in drug use, you'd probably want to go with a self-report survey, or maybe one of our drug surveillance systems like DAWN. If you're interested in crimes maybe that aren't reported to the police, like domestic violence or sex crimes, you're probably going to want to go with a victimization survey like the NCVS. If you're interested in juvenile offending, you're probably going to want to go with one of the self-report mechanisms. And if you're interested in drugs, you're probably going to want to go with a drug surveillance system or one of the self-report mechanisms. So again, there really is no perfect measure. It just depends on the goals of your study and what it is that you're trying to research. So that about wraps it up for Chapter 6. Again, I've just provided a broad overview of the different categories of reporting systems for measuring crime. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I would be happy to address them.